And welcome into the program. This is your game plan for retirement with Northwestern Ohio's resource for a common sense approach to planning for your financial, investment, and retirement future. He is president, founder of McIntire Retirement Services. Chris McIntire, always a pleasure, giving us the information, the guidance that we need in order to have more comfortable, confident financial futures, ladies and gentlemen. That's the mission there at McIntire Retirement Services. Chris, always a pleasure, once again, having you here along with us to provide that guidance. And today we're going to talk about what we really need to retire on the program. I think a question that's on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with our tip of the week here. And, when it comes to retirement, it's not how old you are, okay? It's not the lump sum of money that you have in the 401k. It's not how long you have worked. It's do you have a plan in place to retire when you want to and not worry about running out of money, and not having to work an extra decade. It's getting that plan in place. And sometimes you have to make some hardcore decisions for sure.
So it's not a number there that is a metric that we can measure up. Chris, we talked, I think, a few weeks ago about the measuring stick of the lump sum and how we use that kind of as a metric for thinking about how financially secure and confident we are. But you're saying that lump sum number or how old we are just because I'm 65 and Medicare age or I've worked 30 years, none of those are really telling as to are we going to be successful in retirement?
Yeah, you're exactly right, because you could have worked 40 years and not been a good saver. Okay?
Sure. Yeah.
We see that. You could have worked 20 years and been an unbelievable saver. So, I mean, these things land all over the place. And obviously if you're married and whatnot, men typically marry a younger woman, and so they get to retire first and get some golf rounds in. But that's not necessarily a retirement.
We die first too, though, Chris.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. You're right, buddy.
Yeah. So no universal number, though. You got to have the plan. Retirement is not about hitting an arbitrary number, account value, or age, or length of service. It is about how much do you have and how much do you need, and the ratio and the plan for how to fill that need. And so we'll talk about that on today's program, ladies and gentlemen, how to construct the plan to figure out if your number is the right number and an appropriate number. But of course, as always, Chris does make the offer to put together your game plan for retirement to help you crunch all of the numbers and put them in context and in the right order of operations. And if you would like to get that put together, pick up the phone and start a conversation. Chris would love to have a chat with you, get to know you a little bit, help in any way possible, in any areas that you have questions or concerns, help you address those, and more valuably, put the plan together, your game plan for retirement. So if you'd like to start that conversation, 419-332-0532. No cost or obligation for that. It is a courtesy service that he offers. 419-332-0532. 419-332-0532. So Chris, why is this a magic number approach misleading for savers and investors thinking of retirement?
I think it goes back to years gone by. People used to have pensions. They used to have Social Security benefits, and, we still have Social Security, far fewer pensions nowadays. And they really, lived off of their income. They weren't really focused on investments. Okay. And obviously that changed when most of the pensions have gone away or got frozen. For example, we deal a lot with the Whirlpool Corporation here, a lot of their retirees, and their pension was frozen. I think it was 1999. So, some people worked there for 40 years and they get a $400 or $500 a month pension. Now they have a big 401k, and then the common question is, all right, I've got this money in my 401k. How much can I safely draw out of it? How do we create income out of it? I've been investing for growth. Okay, that's different than investing for income. So that's part of our niche is, creating solid retirement plans that deliver income, that deliver growth as well. And then, a couple of fail-safe strategies in there so that if the investment world goes south, that we have the ability to, have a plan B in place. Most people don't even know if they have a plan A.
Yeah.
We're incorporating a plan B. Yes.
And lifestyle can vary pretty dramatically, Chris. I mean, some people's lifestyle costs them $2,000 a month. And I'm like, well, how do you do that? And then some people's lifestyle costs them $20,000 a month. And I'm like, well, how do you do that? But I mean, it's neither here nor there. If that's your lifestyle, that's your lifestyle. That's the way that you live and what you need to be comfortable. But you better have a plan that addresses that.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. And, if you've, worked for 40 years and barely taken a vacation, and all of a sudden you want to travel the world for the next 5 years while you're enjoying good health, all right, you're probably leaning very heavily on your investment portfolio to deliver that type of income, and like Peter said, hey, maybe you're spending $10,000 a month early on in your retirement to do all the things you want to do. And then as you get older, I've got aging parents right now, and they basically don't do much of anything. We have medical bills, obviously.
Mhm.
So there is this transition that can happen throughout retirement as well, depending on the lifestyle that you want to develop and try to maintain. And then, most people would like to pass on some assets to beneficiaries. Maybe not everybody's concerned about leaving the maximum to their kids. Robin and I, my wife, we don't have children, so not really worried about the legacy. So if we spend some principal throughout our retirement, I don't care.
Yeah, well, the reality though, Chris, I agree with you. Not everybody has a high goal for leaving a large legacy behind. But if we've got a plan for lasting lifestyle confidence for ourselves, then more likely than not, something will be left behind. And we should consider that as well. And the most advantageous assets to be left behind because we don't want the IRS to be our largest beneficiary. I think we can all agree on that. But retirement is very personal. Lifestyle drives the income need. Two couples with the same portfolio value could have dramatically different situations based on lifestyle expectations and longevity and taxes and healthcare state, the state of their health, debt levels, things like that. And so we need to start with spending. It's kind of last things first, first things last. I think, Chris, you would probably agree. Most of the individuals and couples and families that you deal with probably fall into a category or description where they have been lucky or hardworking or blessed enough to earn a pretty comfortable kind of income and maybe don't pay as much attention to the spending practices.
Yes, yeah, without a doubt. And it just seems, here in Northwest Ohio, North Central Ohio, it's kind of that middle class neighborhood, you could call it. And people have done well, have saved money, they have a comfortable lifestyle. A lot of them are debt free or pretty close to debt free going into retirement. In general, that's not everybody by any means. Some of the baby boom generation, they're certainly different than my parents' generation, if you will. Baby boom generation, very active in retirement, where my parents' generation, a little more subdued, right? My dad's 93, my mom's 88. So, heck, they turned 65 decades ago. The people that are turning 65 today, are, very active, in their lifestyle and there's some of their spending habits. So it's neat to see how it evolves. And, as people transition into, I'm just coming into retirement, we're active, not worried about the kids, to like my parents, for example, nursing home issues, healthcare issues, and as people go through, we have to update estate plans. So it is not hey, here's my plan, and it never gets adjusted, right? Planning means you're going to adjust. If, we're right here on Lake Erie. If I want to sail to Cedar Point Amusement Park, on a sailboat, hey, the path I take, the course I set to get there is going to be dependent on what way's the wind blowing,
Yeah.
And, I don't want to say, hey, the wind blows this day and we change and it blows that way. We still do long-term planning, obviously,
Yeah,
but there
and
are
keep life jackets on the on board just in case, right?
absolutely. Yep. We always have life jackets.
Well, but Chris, for that same description of individual who has had a comfortable living and income while they're working, right? The lifestyle that they are accustomed to probably is that much more expensive and the change in income when they retire and leave the paycheck behind is that much more significant. And so I think going back to the budget, not to say we can't spend and we can't do this, but to understand the essential expenses, the discretionary expenses, projecting out for inflation, what that will mean for our future. Is that a basic tenet? Is that a principal pillar of sound retirement planning before we make that big transition?
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, Peter. And our best probably record of success with clients is when we get the ability to do some pre-retirement planning. And for most folks, we think of that age 59 and a half, right? And that's where we can do some in-service distributions from their 401ks into IRAs. So that's not a taxable event, but we can start building their retirement plan, years before they retire. And, that certainly gives them probably a leg up on the rest of the competition that, walked in after 40 years and said, you know what, I think next week I'm going to retire and I'll get this stuff figured out. We help people, with the tax situations. We help them with the income situations. We help them with the estate planning situations and making sure they get some of their documents that they need to have updated. And, so you kind of could call us a quarterback. Yep, we do a lot of we do the wealth management, the income planning and tax planning pretty much in-house. And then we have some good resources as well for healthcare, health insurance, and also, the estate planning side of things as well.
Would it be fair to say, Chris, that those are conversations that many people have missed? I mean, a lot of us have had access to the market, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, 401ks, IRAs, and maybe had some source of guidance on how to utilize our access to the market, which is important, but that wasn't even a high level item that you just mentioned in bringing those pieces together. So do you think that those other components of income and withdrawals and then tax planning and legacy planning are conversations that are too often overlooked in our financial progress?
It certainly can be, and we deal with a wide variety of clientele from engineers at nuclear power plants to your average middle class worker at like Whirlpool, for example, Church and Dwight, and some of it depends on the client's background. Some of them are very financially astute. Some of them are look, I put money in my 401k. You're going to have to help me figure all this out. We're going to put our trust in you. And, so, you have to be flexible in how to deal with all the different types of clientele that you have. And, that's what some of the gray hairs allow us to do because we've been through a couple of rodeos.
Well, if you would like a experienced, qualified guide along your journey and to help you map out and coordinate your game plan for retirement, that's the service that Chris McIntire and the team from McIntire Retirement Services offer. And so many proactive planners, savers, and investors have taken advantage of the offer and have a plan in place to feel more confident and continue to update that along with Chris and the team. But so many more need that help and assistance to understand all of the aspects of planning and how they're all interconnected. And that's what your game plan for retirement is all about. So if you'd like to get your plan put together, pick up the phone, start the conversation. It is a complimentary courtesy service that Chris and the team offer. And it starts with that conversation, 419-332-0532, 419-332-0532. You can also go online to McIntyreRetirementServices.com, McIntyreRetirementServices.com. Chris, as you were talking about the different ages, your parents compared to 65-year-olds today, I think you were touching on this, but there are different phases of retirement that we will go through. But maybe where planners are a little short-sighted is we're making decisions in the last part of our working career and in the first phase of retirement that ultimately have their effects and their implications possibly decades later. And without being through that and seeing it firsthand, maybe we are not aware of how those implications play out and how the choices impact our future.
Yeah, absolutely. And mistakes as we get older get to be more costly and sometimes can be harder to repair. And, we get legislative changes that change some of the rules with IRA distributions. We used to start those at 70 and a half if you weren't taking them already. And now it's age 73. It will eventually bump itself out to age 75. And then when mom and dad pass away, what happens to those taxable IRA funds? Well, now they have to be distributed within a 10-year time frame of the death of your parent, for example. And you have to be able to adapt to some of these legislative issues, and that's why tax planning is a very important part of your overall retirement plan as well. You got income planning, tax planning, estate planning. So your retirement plan is made up of many different facets, and those, just like we talked about, trying to sail out on Lake Erie. As the legislative winds change, you need to be able to adapt to those as well, and that's where tax planning is plays a critical role.
Well, Chris, we began the program saying that it's not about the lump sum. The lump sum does not paint the complete picture or totally tell us if we're financially prepared for decades of retirement in front of us. So what additional factors do we need to consider with looking at that lump sum? I mean, longevity, inflation, taxes. I know all of these play in. What are some of those factors that you help people understand and coordinate?
Yeah, so from the timing of Social Security benefits, how do they go about filing for them? What are the options? We look at the investment plan to, how do we get money from the 401k and divide that out into an income plan, a growth plan? Then we also help with Roth conversions, assisting with the tax planning piece between us and our CPA referrals that we have. Very, very key component of what we do. And then the estate planning, we also assist and do a lot of appointments with the attorneys right on a video screen on a Zoom appointment to help them get wills, powers of attorney, trusts, of all different shapes and sizes. So, we kind of quarterback the whole situation there with everybody. And I think we're just good problem solvers. So, Heidi, a lot of times she helps review their property and casualty insurance because that's what she used to do. She keeps up with her continuing education. We don't sell it, but she'll review it and make a couple of suggestions there. And, look, go back to your agent and say, what should we do about this? Getting a bigger umbrella policy, to helping with the kids and the grandkids even, Peter.
A concern that I think is on the minds of a lot of investors right now, Chris, market volatility. I mean, when we look at the lump sum and gauge our financial confidence off that lump sum, we do have to kind of realize and take with a grain of salt that the market has influence on that and can wash away or erode some of that outside of our control.
Yeah, it certainly can. And obviously, we're looking at the price of oil right now. And, I have a diesel pickup truck and put $180 of diesel fuel in it last week. And
Ouch.
that's a stinger. And I have a boat. And thankfully, it's not quite in the water yet. So, we might stick closer to shore and, just enjoy it. And so, hey, we all have to adapt to, the inflationary environment that we're dealing with here right now. And hopefully it's a short-term problem, not a long-term problem. And, everybody has their own opinions on it. But, you can see, like some of those countries in the Middle East, if they get nuclear weapons, I mean, look what they're doing to the Strait of Hormuz right now. Imagine what they would do if they had a nuclear weapon. So, history will tell us, was this the right move or what have you. Same with Venezuela, same thing there.
Yeah, but those headlines, Chris, when this Iran conflict started, the Liberation Day announcement with the tariffs, Russia and Ukraine, we saw during those periods, even COVID, we saw temporary volatility, which is a natural state of the market that's ever present. Temporary volatility, however, is different than long-term declines. I think that was your tip of the week several weeks ago on the program as we were addressing the market volatility. We have not seen a true long-term decline for quite some time. Maybe 2022, as they were raising interest rates, is the most recent fresh memory of more prolonged declines. But we do have to be prepared for that with the lump sum that we have in the market and have invested. So when we're trying to structure a confident retirement, are there any income planning strategies or scenarios that can hold up well in the midst of market volatility?
Yeah, so a couple of different examples here. If you want a contractual guarantee of lifetime income, with a portion of your lump sum rollover or your pension rollover that you could do, we use fixed index annuities or fixed annuities for kind of like call it a safe money option, if you will, but you can have some contractual guarantees of lifetime income there. Okay. You can use dividend stocks to help complement that. You can use high quality bonds and use the interest. We use structured notes that have a nice high yield with a degree of protection associated with them as well to help, pay out Social Security and annuity payment, dividend payments, bond interest, structured note interest. There are a lot of different pieces here, and some people are probably listening to the show saying, I don't know what the heck he's talking about. Right, because that's what we do. I don't know how to build a car or fix a car engine, but we do know how to build an income engine.
We hear more often, Chris, about bucketing and a bucket approach to our assets and allocation. Is the bucket approach something that savers and investors should learn more about or consider as they are nearing or entering retirement? Is this a strategy we need to educate ourselves on?
Yeah, and we can make this a visual reference as well. So for those of us that are just listening and can't see Peter and I talking, so you can think of three buckets, and you could have one could be your income bucket, okay, or your safe money bucket. Okay, just giving a couple of different examples. You have another bucket could be, hey, I'm going to use this money after 10 years of my retirement. Okay, and then the third bucket is I'm going to use this money after 20 years of my retirement, and it's going to be more invested in stocks and, things for growth. So, if you think of that bucket approach, low risk, moderate risk, higher risk, income producing, it's a great analogy. And I love it when clients come in and say, look, I got my, I just retired. I'm in my go-go years. So I need a bucket for my go-go, my slow-go, and my no-go years. And I got a client, him and I talk about that quite a bit. So hopefully he listens to the show and shoots me an email.
Well, I mean, if they're coming in asking about that, Chris, they're probably listeners or viewers of the program. We've talked about that. How about the old protect the principal and live off the interest kind of approach? Chris, is that still doable? Is that still relevant for retirees today with where our interest rates are or have been?
Well, not where they have been because, they were so low historically. Income planning, doing the traditional stock bond mixture, when interest rates are basically zero, from the 2008 financial crisis and then through COVID, and obviously you mentioned 2022, so we're kind of in a more normal interest rate environment. So income planning is a little easier now using other instruments. The annuity payments have gone up, the interest rates have gone up off of bonds, and then dividend stocks need to compete with some of that. So good quality companies. So it's and I don't want to say it's easy. It's less challenging in a normal interest rate environment than a 0% interest rate environment to generate income. The other side to that coin, Peter, is, they raise interest rates 11 times and those lump sum pension payouts got smaller because it takes less money to create the income at a higher interest rate. So for those of you that have been paying attention to your lump sum pension buyouts, you've probably seen some fluctuation in that lump sum value.
Chris, another approach here for we're talking about different strategies that can withstand some market volatility. I have heard the approach of, well, I'm just going to keep a few years worth of expenses in cash. And maybe this is the one that you started with, having a more conservative bucket. But does it make sense to keep that much money in cash or outside of the market when for the vast majority of years the market is up way more than it is down?
Yeah, and and you have to build your portfolio around your overall risk tolerance. And we help clients all the time that say, "Hey, we got $80,000 sitting in the checking account now. Can we put some of this in an account where we can make some more?" And then we gauge, all right, do you want to have a little risk to it where you get a little bit higher upside potential, or do you want to keep it safe and just generate some fair amount of interest? And so a lot of different options out there that we can tailor to the individual client. But like you say, or like we say to our clients, Peter, is look, you need to have an emergency cushion, and typically have that at the local bank where you can go in there and get it. I mean, I do keep most of our money at Charles Schwab, our personal stuff. And, because I can get the money in and out very easily, but some folks still, want to walk down to the local bank. Heck, I can have it put into my local bank account, obviously because of what we do and the way how fast we can transfer funds around. So everybody's got their personal preference.
But you're talking 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, not 3 years worth of spending.
Yeah. And Peter, we call that lazy money. And you don't want to have too much lazy money, especially with the inflation rate right now. You need to help keep pace with that because otherwise you're losing your purchasing power. And I think it was Ben Bernanke or Alan Greenspan, a couple of the former Federal Reserve chairmen, they said, that inflation is the same thing as a stealth tax. You're paying it, but you don't see it. So, if something costs $100 this year and it costs $105 next year, you need to make 5% just to keep pace with things. Otherwise, you're losing your purchasing power. That's the inflation threat that we're all dealing with currently with the fuel prices.
Chris, a friend of ours, a mutual friend, Ron Corser, once told me a story of when he was in the Army and in the wisdom of the Army. Instead of ordering custom uniform sizes, they ordered sizes for uniforms of the average soldier. And those uniforms never ended up fitting anyone perfectly because there's no such thing as average. There's no such thing as one size fits all. And I think
Yeah.
that applies here, right? There is no perfect strategy that is a one size fits all. So we need to blend these and then continue to monitor them because conditions are going to change in the world and in our lives. And I think that's why having the relationship with a resource and a planner such as yourself is so valuable and gives more proactive planners and savers additional confidence and reassurance as they move through these different phases of retirement.
Yes, absolutely. And, and I love Ron. And so I'm going to give Ron another shout out that says, when you build these plans for these clients, even if you're just a little bit off course, by the time you get there, you might miss it by 10 miles. Remember Ron saying that?
Yeah. He's got lots of great stories. He was a navigator in the Army and he used to
Yes.
chart the course, but he realized one leg was shorter than the other. He'd have to adjust every 100 paces or so. Oh, Ron, great storyteller there. But Chris, the biggest mistake here, not having a plan, not having a roadmap. Imagine trying to chart that course without knowing where you're going or without having the destination. So I think the biggest takeaway here, not only that there's not an arbitrary number, not one size fits all, but we have to have a plan in place, that roadmap and the game plan for retirement that you help your clients put together is exactly that. It helps people map it out where they are now, where they want to get to, and the strategies that will get them there efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with the fiduciary responsibility and a wide range of investment options, both with with safe money option and then obviously some growth potential as well. When we're happy to do this, decade after decade, and here we go again.
Yeah, well, income is essential, but clarity creates confidence, ladies and gentlemen. Most people before retirement have never reversed the direction of their money, never taken it out of the stocks, the bonds, the mutual funds, the 401ks, the IRAs, and that is a detailed process that takes more than most people imagine, and is a little bit more complicated. So deal with an experienced, qualified professional who has seen it before many times over, has helped other people understand what works well and maybe what to avoid. And Chris McIntire is there as your resource. If you'd like to get your game plan for retirement put together, pick up the phone, give a call, get that conversation started. It is a no cost courtesy service, 419 332 0532, 419 819-332-0532. Chris, always appreciate your time here on the program, reminding us of what is important, what we need to do or consider for our lasting financial confidence before and after the paycheck stops.
Hey, my pleasure. Good to be with everybody. Stay safe out there, and may God bless America.
Tune into Chris McIntire's full radio program and visit McIntireRetirementServices.com for many additional valuable resources, including other great episodes of Game Plan for Retirement with Chris McIntire. Be sure to subscribe.
The content of this radio show is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. You are encouraged to seek investment, tax, or legal advice from an independent professional advisor. Any investments and/or investment strategies mentioned involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. Advisory services offered through Brookstone Capital Management, a registered investment advisor.
Fiduciary duty extends solely to investment advisory advice and does not extend to other activities such as insurance or broker-dealer services. Advisory clients are charged a quarterly fee for assets under management, while insurance products pay a commission, which may result in a conflict of interest regarding compensation.